Welcome to our deep dive into the world of memory science. I know you're curious about how memory works, the science behind it all.
It really is fascinating.
Yeah, so we're going to draw from this really interesting booklet I found called Neuroscience, the Science of the Brain. And it was put together by experts from the British Neuroscience Association and the European Dana Alliance for the Brain. So,
It's a great resource.
yeah, and throughout this deep dive, we'll be talking about how our brains change throughout life. And we'll even touch on how scientists are working to create artificial brains.
We've learned so much about the brain, even just the basics are mind-blowing.
Okay, so let's start with the basics then. I mean, this thing we call the brain is more complex than any computer, right?
Absolutely. Your brain is a network of billions of neurons with trillions of connections between them. And get this, it all runs on about the same amount of energy as a nightlight. Incredible efficiency.
Wow, that puts things in perspective. So how do all these billions of neurons actually communicate with each other?
Well, they communicate through electrical and chemical signals. Imagine an electrical impulse traveling down a long, thin fiber called an axon.
Okay, I'm picturing like a tiny spark zipping along a wire.
That's a good analogy. That spark is called an action potential, and when it reaches the end of the axon, it triggers the release of chemical messengers called neurotransmitters.
So these neurotransmitters are how the signal jumps from one neuron to the next.
Exactly. They cross a tiny gap called a synapse and bind to receptors on the next neuron, and that communication can either excite the next neuron, making it more likely to fire, or inhibit it, making it less likely to fire.
So it's like a constant balancing act to make sure the right messages are getting through.
Precisely. It ensures that messages are transmitted effectively throughout the brain.
That's amazing. So how does all this neural communication translate into us experiencing the world, like, feeling a hug or tasting chocolate?
That's where our senses come in. We have these specialized receptors all over our bodies that can detect different types of stimuli. For example, receptors in our skin can detect pressure, temperature, and pain.
So when I touch like a fluffy blanket, those receptors are sending signals to my brain telling me, hey, this is soft and cozy.
Exactly. And the density of these receptors varies across the body. Think about how sensitive your fingertips are compared to, say, your elbows.
Oh, yeah, that's true. It's because our fingertips have way more receptors crammed in there, right?
Exactly. It's like having a high-definition screen versus a standard one. And it's not just passive input either. You get even more information by actively exploring with your fingers.
Like when you're trying to figure out the texture of something, you don't just press down, you kind of rub your fingers over it.
Exactly. You're getting a more complete picture of the texture that way. So that's touch. What about vision? How does the brain create a picture of the world from the light hitting our eyes?
Right, it seems like magic.
Well, light enters your eyes and stimulates photoreceptor cells in the retina, and these cells then convert the light into electrical signals which travel along the optic nerve to the brain.
So he's like translating light waves into a language the brain can understand.
Exactly. Various areas of the brain then process this information, extracting details about color, shape, motion, and depth to create that internal representation of what we see.
It's like our brain is constantly editing a movie based on the raw footage from our eyes. It's wild. Now, I know this booklet mentions something about brain area V5. What is that all about?
Ah, V5. That's a fascinating area. It's particularly involved in perceiving motion. Studies have shown that V5 activity reflects the perceived motion, even in illusions where there's no actual movement.
Whoa! So even when I'm watching a movie, it's my brain that's actively constructing the experience of motion that's crazy.
It really is. Your brain is much more active than you might realize. And speaking of action, let's shift gears and talk about how the brain controls our movements.
Okay, let's say I want to reach for my coffee cup. What's happening in my brain to make that happen?
First, your brain needs to come up with a plan. Your prefrontal cortex, which is the decision-making center, gets involved. It assesses where the cup is, how far to reach, how much force to use.
Like mini mission control for my hand.
Exactly. Then the motor cortex sends signals down your spinal cord to activate the muscles in your arm and hand.
So the motor cortex is calling the shots, telling the muscles what to do. But I think there's something about the basal ganglia and cerebellum being involved too, right?
You're right. The basal ganglia help to select and initiate the correct movement sequence, while the cerebellum fine-tunes the timing and coordination to ensure your reach is smooth and accurate.
It's like an incredibly complex dance happening in our brains with all these regions working together seamlessly. What happens when this coordination breaks down, like in Parkinson's disease?
Parkinson's affects a brain area called the substantia nigra, which produces dopamine, which is a crucial neurotransmitter. The loss of dopamine disrupts communication in the basal ganglia, and that leads to the tremors, slowness, and rigidity that characterize the disease.
It's a reminder of how delicate this whole system is. All this talk about the brain changing makes me think of plasticity. You mentioned earlier how the brain is like a plasticine model, always changing and adapting. Tell me more about that.
Brain plasticity, or neuroplasticity, is the brain's incredible ability to modify its structure and function throughout life based on our experiences.
So our brains aren't just fixed, they're constantly evolving.
Precisely every new skill you learn, every memory you form, reflects changes in the connections between neurons.
So it's like our brains are constantly rewiring themselves. Does that mean the use it or lose it idea is really true?
Absolutely. The more you engage in certain activities or thought patterns, the stronger those neural pathways become. On the flip side, if you neglect certain skills, those connections may weaken.
That's motivating. It means we have the power to shape our own brains to some extent. But how does this rewiring actually happen? I know you mentioned synapses and glutamate receptors earlier.
You're right, synaptic plasticity is a key mechanism. It refers to changes in the strength of synapses, those tiny gaps where neurons communicate. And glutamate, a major excitatory neurotransmitter, plays a crucial role.
Okay, so glutamate is like the fuel for communication between neurons.
Yeah.
What about these receptors?
Well, there are different types of glutamate receptors. One type, AMPA receptors, act like gatekeepers. They control the flow of ions into the neuron.
So they determine how strong the signal will be.
Exactly. Then there are NMDA receptors, which are a bit more complex. They're also ion channels, but they're usually blocked. However, when the neuron is strongly activated, that block is removed and calcium ions can flow in.
Why is calcium so important?
Calcium acts as a second messenger, triggering a cascade of changes that strengthen the synapse, making future communication more efficient.
So it's like the calcium is saying, hey, this connection's important, make it stronger. That's amazing. So every time we learn something new, these tiny connections in our brains are actually changing.
You got it. And this synaptic plasticity is considered the foundation of learning and memory. By altering the strength of connections, our brains can store information and retrieve it later.
That makes you wonder if we could somehow harness this plasticity. Could we learn even more effectively or maybe even recover from brain injuries faster?
That's a question neuroscientists are actively investigating, and there's some evidence that activities like cognitive training or even meditation can boost plasticity.
That's really interesting. But for now, let's turn our attention to memory itself. I know our brains have multiple memory systems, each with its own unique job. Could you walk us through those?
We can think of memory as having these two main branches, working memory and long-term memory.
Okay, so working memory is like our mental scratch pad, right, where we hold information we're actively using.
Exactly. It's a temporary storage system like the RAM in a computer. It's where you juggle numbers while calculating a tip or remember a phone number just long enough to dial it.
And then long-term memory is where we store all the experiences and facts we want to keep.
Yes. Long-term memory is more like a hard drive with a much larger capacity for storing information for much longer periods. It's our vast library of information, holding everything from childhood memories to the lyrics of your favorite song.
But even within long-term memory, there are different types, right? It's not just one big storage bin.
You're absolutely right. We can break down long-term memory into declarative memory and non-declarative memory.
Right, I'm intrigued. What's the difference?
Declarative memory, also called explicit memory, is the kind we can consciously access and talk about. It includes memories for facts, events, personal experiences.
So if I ask you about your favorite vacation, you'd be using declarative memory to tell me all about it.
Exactly. It's the kind of memory we often associate with remembering something. Then there's non-declarative memory, also known as implicit memory, which operates beneath the surface of our awareness. It's expressed through actions and skills rather than words.
So things like riding a bike or playing a musical instrument would fall under non-declarative memory.
Yes. These are skills we learn through practice and repetition. You might not be able to explain how you ride a bike, but your body just knows what to do. It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is. It makes you realize how much our brains are doing behind the scenes without us even realizing it. But going back to declarative memory, I know there are further subdivisions there too, right?
There are, within declarative memory, we have semantic memory and episodic memory.
Okay, let's unpack those terms. What's semantic memory?
Semantic memory is our general knowledge about the world. Think of it as your mental encyclopedia. It holds facts, concepts, vocabulary, things like knowing the capital of France or the rules of grammar.
It's like the information we accumulate over a lifetime of learning.
Exactly. Then there's episodic memory, which is all about personal experiences. It's the memory of events, the kind that allows you to mentally travel back in time and re-experience moments from your past.
So remembering your first day of school or that amazing concert you went to would be examples of episodic memory.
Precisely. Episodic memories are often rich in sensory details, sights, sounds, smells, and they're often tied to specific emotions.
It's like having a mental photo album filled with vivid snapshots of our lives. So to recap, we have working memory for temporary storage, long-term memory for more permanent storage, and within long-term memory we have declarative memory, which includes semantic and episodic memory, and then there's non-declarative memory for skills and habits. Wow, our brains are amazing organizers.
They truly are. And to add another layer of complexity, all these memory systems don't operate in isolation. They interact and influence each other in really interesting ways.
I'm ready to dive deeper. One thing that's always fascinated me is the hippocampus. I know it's super important for memory, but how does it actually work?
The hippocampus is like the brain's librarian, helping to organize and index our memories. It's particularly crucial for forming new long-term memories.
So if the hippocampus is damaged, people have trouble forming new memories, right? I remember learning about amnesia.
Exactly. Damage to the hippocampus can lead to amnesia, making it difficult or impossible to form new long-term memories. It's like losing the ability to save new files on your computer's hard drive.
That must be so debilitating.
Yeah.
But what's always struck me is that even people with amnesia can sometimes learn new skills even if they don't consciously remember the learning process. It's like their implicit memory system is still working.
That's a great observation. It highlights how different memory systems can operate somewhat independently. Someone with amnesia might learn to ride a bike, but have no recollection of the lessons they took.
So their body remembers, even if their conscious mind doesn't. It's amazing. And a little bit eerie.
It certainly is. It really underscores the complexity and resilience of the brain's memory systems. Now, speaking of resilience, you mentioned sleep earlier. I know sleep is essential for our overall health, but what role does it play in memory?
Well, I've heard that sleep is when our brains sort of tidy up and consolidate memories. Is that true?
Absolutely. Sleep is crucial for memory consolidation during sleep. Our brains replay and reorganize the memories we formed during the day, strengthening those connections and transferring information from short-term to long-term storage. It's like our brains are working offline, backing up important data.
So if I don't get enough sleep, my memories might not be as strong.
That's right. Sleep deprivation can impair memory performance, making it harder to learn new things and recall information you've already learned. Think of it this way. A well-rested brain is a much more efficient learning machine.
That's definitely motivation to prioritize sleep. But besides sleep, are there other factors that can impact our memory?
Stress is a big one. When we're stressed, our bodies release hormones like cortisol, which can interfere with memory function.
Oh, I've definitely felt that brain fog when I'm stressed.
Yeah.
It's like my thoughts are all scattered and I can't focus.
That's a common experience. Cortisol, often called the stress hormone, can impair the hippocampus's ability to form new memories and retrieve existing ones.
So a little bit of stress might be okay, but chronic stress is bad news for our memory.
Exactly. It's all about finding that balance. Now, there's another fascinating area of research that's shedding light on the complexities of memory, the connection between the brain and the immune system.
Wait, the immune system? I thought that was all about fighting off infections. What does it have to do with memory?
For a long time, scientists thought the brain was immune privileged, meaning it was shielded from the immune system. But we now know that's not true. The brain and immune system are in constant communication, influencing each other in really profound ways.
Wow, that's incredible. So how do they talk to each other?
The immune system releases signaling molecules called cytokines that can act on the brain, influencing mood, sleep, and even memory.
So when I'm sick and feeling foggy-headed, it's not just the illness. It's my immune system sending signals to my brain.
Exactly. And these signals can have both positive and negative effects. Some cytokines can actually promote sleep, which, as we discussed, is crucial for memory consolidation.
So maybe that feeling of fatigue when we're sick is our body's way of encouraging us to rest and let our brains do their memory work.
That's a possibility. However, other cytokines can promote inflammation in the brain, which can be detrimental to cognitive function.
So it's a complex relationship with the immune system, playing kind of a dual role in brain health. It's amazing how interconnected everything is.
It really is. And this understanding of the brain-immune connection is opening up new avenues of research for treating neurological and psychiatric disorders.
That's incredibly exciting. It makes you realize that to truly understand the brain, we need to consider its interactions with all the other systems in the body. It's a holistic perspective.
Absolutely. And speaking of getting a bigger picture, we can't forget about the incredible tools we now have to peer inside the living brain. Brain imaging techniques like PFT and MRI have revolutionized our understanding of how the brain works.
Brain scans are so fascinating. I remember the first time I saw one, it was like a window into the mind.
They're incredible tools. PET, or positron emission tomography, involves injecting a small amount of a radioactive tracer that's taken up by active brain regions. By detecting the emissions from the tracer, we can create images of brain activity, seeing which areas light up during different tasks.
So if someone's taking a memory test while in a PET scanner, we could actually see which parts of their brain are working hard to retrieve those memories.
Exactly. PET has been instrumental in mapping out the brain's functional regions, identifying areas involved in language memory attention, and a host of other cognitive functions.
That's amazing. And what about MRI? How is that different from PT?
MRI, or magnetic resonance imaging, is a non-invasive technique that uses powerful magnets and radio waves to create detailed images of the brain's structure.
So MRI is more about anatomy, seeing the shape and size of different brain regions, while PE is about function, seeing which areas are active.
You got it. And both techniques are incredibly valuable for research and clinical practice. MRI can reveal structural abnormalities like tumors or damage from a stroke, while PE can show us how the brain is functioning in real time.
It's mind-blowing how far we've come in our ability to visualize the brain,
Yeah.
but I'm also curious about the efforts to create artificial brains. I know there's a lot of buzz about artificial intelligence and neural networks. What can you tell me about that?
Artificial intelligence, or AI, is a rapidly advancing field, and one approach is to create artificial neural networks, or ANNs, which are computer systems inspired by the structure and function of biological neural networks.
So they're trying to build a computer brain?
In a way, yes, ANNs consist of interconnected processing units, or nodes, that are like simplified versions of neurons. These nodes receive input, process it, and send output to other nodes, just like neurons do.
So it's like a vast network of mini computers all working together.
Exactly. And by adjusting the strength of the connections between nodes, we can train ANNs to perform specific tasks. They're already being used in everything from self-driving cars to facial recognition software.
That's incredible. But how close are we to creating an artificial brain that truly rivals the complexity of the human brain?
ANNs are still far from matching the capabilities of the human brain, but they've made remarkable progress. And as research continues, we can expect to see even more sophisticated AI systems emerging.
It's both exciting and a little bit daunting to think about the possibilities and the potential risks. It feels like you're stepping into a whole new era.
It certainly does. And with these advancements come important ethical considerations. As our understanding of the brain deepens, we need to be mindful of how this knowledge is applied.
I'm glad you brought that up. I know there's a whole field of neuroethics that's grappling with these very issues.
That's right. We need to ensure that neuroscience research is conducted responsibly and that its applications benefit humanity. It's a conversation that needs to involve scientists, ethicists, policymakers, and the public.
It's a reminder that science is not just about discovering facts. It's also about understanding the human implications of those facts. And speaking of fascinating discoveries, are there any findings in memory science that really surprised you?
Well, one thing that always fascinates me is the connection between taste and memory.
Oh yeah, I know certain smells can trigger really vivid memories, but taste too, that's wild.
It is fascinating. Taste is incredibly powerful. Think about how a simple bite of a familiar food can transport you back to your childhood or evoke a strong emotional memory.
Like how the taste of my grandma's apple pie instantly brings back memories of her kitchen and holidays spent together.
Exactly. The way taste is processed in the brain is intricately linked to the regions involved in memory and emotion. When you taste something, that information travels to the gustatory cortex, but it also goes to areas like the hippocampus and the amygdala, which are key players in memory formation and emotional processing.
So it's like the taste information is being cross-referenced with our memory banks and emotional centers, creating this multi-sensory experience.
Precisely. And that helps explain why taste-related memories can be so powerful and enduring. They're not just about the taste itself. They're tied to a whole web of associations and emotions.
That's really interesting. It makes you realize how much our senses shape our memories and our experiences.
Absolutely. And speaking of shaping experiences, let's talk about how brain plasticity plays a role in recovery from brain injuries. It's remarkable how the brain can reorganize itself even after significant damage.
It's like the brain has this incredible ability to adapt and find new pathways when the old ones are blocked. It gives me so much hope.
It is a source of hope. And this plasticity isn't limited to young brains. Even in adulthood, our brains retain a remarkable capacity for change and adaptation.
So even after a stroke or a traumatic brain injury, it's possible for the brain to rewire itself and regain at least some of the lost function.
That's right. Of course, the extent of recovery depends on many factors, including the severity of the injury and the individual's overall health. But there's growing evidence that rehabilitation therapies that encourage active use of the affected brain regions can promote plasticity and enhance recovery.
So it's not just about passive healing, it's about actively engaging the brain and encouraging it to find new ways to function.
Exactly. It's like physical therapy for the brain.
Yeah.
By challenging ourselves and engaging in stimulating activities, we can harness the power of plasticity to help our brains adapt and recover, and it's never too late to start.
That's such an important message. It's never too late to learn and grow, and even in the face of adversity, our brains can find ways to heal and adapt.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great note to end on. We've journeyed through the intricate world of memory science, exploring the brain's remarkable capacity for communication, adaptation, and resilience.
It's been an incredible deep dive from understanding how neurons communicate to unraveling the complexities of memory systems to exploring the cutting edge of research in artificial intelligence and neuroethics. We've covered a lot of ground.
And I hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and left you with a sense of wonder about this most incredible organ, the brain.
To our listeners, thank you for joining us on this exploration of memory science. We encourage you to continue learning and exploring, and to remember that the journey of discovery is just beginning.